And when we talk about, look, and the apartheid word specifically is both used by people who were crucial in ending apartheid in South Africa, like Desmond Tutu or Ronnie Kasrils, who served as intelligence minister under Mbeki, who I've interviewed. And the other main people who use the apartheid word are Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak. So it is what it is. And I don't support second-class citizenship and occupation and sieges for anybody, no matter who they are.
Are you not concerned about the binary between either condemning Israel entirely, being like also a stance that a lot of like very strong and notorious anti-Semitic people agree with, versus like, seeing this as a where it's wrong what's going on and that there's also...
So that's my editing mistake there, folks.
So it's not a complex issue. That's the big thing. It's super simple. There's one group that has enormous power. It's the most powerful country in the Middle East. It's backed by the United States. It acts on another population of people with total impunity and is never held accountable for anything. So there's no symmetry in the relationship, period. And just as like a thought experiment, IDW people, if we know that if somehow a population of Jewish refugees ended up in West Bank and Gaza, and an Arabic government in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv had an open-air prison in Jewish Gaza, which they bombed with white phosphorus. They killed civilians indiscriminately, and they had no provisions for medicine. They had an embargo that blocked food, that electricity wasn't running, that there was an over 48% unemployment rate. Life expectancy and malnutrition statistics were horrifying. One of the major policymakers in this hypothetical Arabic Palestinian state said, we need to put those Jews on a diet. In the West Bank, there was another Jewish area where there was a little bit more autonomy, but there was regular Arabic settlements where they pulled up the Jewish farmers' foods. They terrorized them with rocks. The security forces broke children's bones, and they couldn't drive on their own roads. We'd all have no problem understanding what that was. So there's nothing complex about it. The second part of your question, it's a pure asymmetry relationship.
Welcome everybody to this week's episode of Left Reckoning. My name is David Griscom, broadcasting to y'all live from Austin, Texas, and I'm joined by Matt Leck, avid Maoist enthusiast this week.
Yeah, I just love that music. People will remember that from the last intro, and I'm not quite the video editor I thought I was, and left that element in there. But I'm
no, it's good. It's very revolutionary. You're blocking the speech of a counter-revolutionary and then focusing on Michael's speech. I actually think it's a good edit. Well, we got a lot to talk to y'all about tonight. In a little bit, we're going to be joined by Matt Huber, who's written some really great pieces in both Catalyst and Jacobin magazine about how you should think about the rich and their relationship to climate catastrophe. That's a little bit about how we should be thinking about money and politics. I'm really looking forward to that. And then afterwards, Matt and I are going to be talking a little bit about infrastructure. But before we get into all of that, we have to start with the big news of these past couple of weeks, a continuation, an acceleration of the apartheid system in Israel, a continuation of ethnic cleansing against the Palestinian people. This is something that we just can't equivocate on anymore, and we can't accept equivocation. It's something that truly exposes to people that this line that folks try to make between domestic and foreign policy is not a hard one at all. These questions affect you, they affect human beings, and this is not something that is just of academic interest to a few people. This is something that affects lives today, and we need to treat it as such. Everybody listening to this, I'm sure, understands generally what's been going on. Continuation of the forced evictions of Palestinians from their homes by far-right Israeli settlers with the full support of the legal system and the state of Israel. During Ramadan, nonetheless, police raiding raiding a mosque while people were still inside worshiping. the burning of the grounds around one of the most holy sites in Islam. And as we are broadcasting right now, a horrific escalation of violence in Gaza, where the IDF who have already been pounding the Palestinian people who are living in what can only be described as an open air prison, from the air with their warplanes. Reports that we have seen coming into this have been that there are now going to be ground troops entering into Gaza. As Michael said, and he says it so well in that clip, this is an asymmetrical conflict. Using these words like clash, using all of these things that people use to obfuscate what is happening there is something that we can no longer accept. There's a lot that I want to get to in a short amount of time, so I want to open this up to Matt. I will say, as a brief bit of optimism here, in the many years that I have been a supporter of the Palestinians' right to freedom, I will say I have not seen a response against the apartheid system in Israel as strong in the United States as what we have been seeing over the past couple of weeks. It's not perfect. It's not what we need. It's not enough. But I will say that I've never seen this level of condemnation. And I think this is something that, instead of sitting on our butts and being happy about that, we should try to encourage more and more people to not just get educated about these things in an academic sense, but to understand, especially people living in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, that we actually have a lot of responsibility and a lot of power to fight back against this system as well.
Yeah. Such a strange thing, right? Like CNN having an actual Palestinian on that's being kicked out, and was subsequently Mohammed al-Kurd removed from his house, and have them on at least to cut through a narrative that again, like even up to the president is still maintaining, right? You start any sort of discussion, the very first point of emphasis is the rockets. It's not anything preceding that. And yeah, I mean, we'll probably talk about it more, but just to get to it, Biden's statement last night was despicable and basically set the table for this. Said, I hope this closes down soon. What does that mean? Like, close down soon?
Not only that, there's no condemnation of what Israel is doing. It's just affirmation that they have a right to defend themselves. It's despicable on its face. And it's something that we should be very clear about. There are rockets which can do damage, but not as much as warplanes. We were seeing, I was sharing on Tuesday videos of residential towers being bombed into rubble. I'm sorry, this is not a symmetrical conflict. In East Jerusalem, we're talking about, gangs of far right vigilantes beating up people in the streets with the support of the police, right? And then, we're talking about stones, right? These things are not comparable. It's very clear who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed in this situation. And I think it's something you don't even have to be a leftist to recognize that this is something that cannot continue.
Yeah.
I also, just before we move on to anything else, I did also want to make sure that we aren't just saying, look, Biden's rhetoric is despicable, right? But there are actions behind these things. Again, the United States gives an incredible sum of money to Israel to maintain this system, right? And there are a lot of interests that fight very hard to maintain that relationship. But even on the day-to-day stuff, Joe Biden and the U.S. State Department are refusing to even allow the United Nations to meet on this issue until next week, right? These are concrete decisions by the Biden administration to not only sweep things under the rug, but to actually create, a dynamic where this can continue, and that international cooperation, as difficult as that is in the first place, they're just not even going to allow that to happen.
Yeah, giving space for ethnic cleansing, basically.
Yeah.
There's this video here. There's all. That's the other thing is, like, I remember. Like the social media element of what's going on right now is very interesting too, in addition to like CNN allowing somebody on. But this video, Janan Musa, surreal. There's Palestinian children in Gaza celebrating Eid.
It's good.
Eid, as war continues in the background. And I mean, yeah, this is just this imagery is just
الله أكبر ولله الحمد. حي ربنا.
I should say, as I learned in watching Abby Martin's documentary that is available now, and I'm blanking on the name of it now, but if you
But Gaza
search Empire
Fights for
Files,
Freedom.
yeah, Gaza Fights for Freedom, and Empire Files YouTube, go watch that. But I mean, Gaza, as I think she says, the third most densely packed place.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a small strip of land that houses 2 million people. And I mean, there's so it's like, and there's so much to say about this, but this is another thing when it comes to Gaza in particular. Like, this is occupation, and the term open air prison is correct. That is what it means when you don't control your own borders, right? When Israel is preventing people from even being able to fish, let alone being able to control what kind of medicines and foods and things that they're able to import, into these areas. I mean, these systems, the poverty there is something that is very much man-made and created, and is deliberate
By design, yeah.
by design.
Yeah, being starved slowly. Yeah, horrifying. And hopefully there's less violence than we're expecting at this point, with the IDF, happily announcing they're going to invade Gaza. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if Matt's ready yet. If we want to go to that, or I think maybe later we have some more videos of Michael that we sort of wanted to break down and to talk about as well, because this is a long fight, and I think it's important to get the message out there about the truth of what's the truth of the conflict as it's happening, like right now today, but also the historical dynamics, because I know a lot of people get very intimidated by the subject, like privately. They might feel one way. Privately, you're horrified when you see these images. But there are entire industries, there are, very concerted efforts to confuse people and intimidate them, like intellectually intimidate them, so that they're afraid to speak up.
It's by design, exactly. If you feel that way, which I mean, Michael talks about it in one of the clips in that lecture earlier. I definitely felt the exact same way. Like, it just felt like an issue you don't touch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that, because you hear like the rote things like, this is such a complex thing, you have to go back millennia or whatever, like all these sorts of like phrases that really just give you an out from coming down anywhere on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's really what that stuff is designed for.
Absolutely.
So we're going to switch gears a little bit, I think, if we're ready, and take a little quick break, and we'll be back with Matt Huber to talk about how we should be correctly blaming rich people for the ongoing climate catastrophe around us, and also, like Biden not actually doing enough. Turns out, surprise, we need like some sort of sound alert or for that.
No, we need to go back to getting sound on the show.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, maybe soon, but we will see you in a few minutes, folks. back.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. We are very lucky to be joined this evening by Matt Huber, who's an associate professor of geography and the environment at Syracuse. He's also the author of a couple of great pieces we're going to be sort of jumping into. The first one is in Jacobin magazine. It's called "Rich People Are Fueling Climate Catastrophe." And the second one, which people should definitely check out if they haven't had the chance yet, because it's a very rich read, is in Catalyst magazine, is "Still No Shortcuts for Climate Change." Thanks so much for hanging out with us today, Matt.
So much for having me.
Well, let's start with this first piece. You're sort of breaking down. A lot of people on the left are very, very quick to recognize that climate change is a class issue. Mm-hmm. But a way that it's framed a lot of times is that it's solely a consumption issue, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, rich people, they have 2 fridges. Rich people get nice ice cream shipped in from California. Rich people fly around a lot. And, those things aren't necessarily great for the environment. But you're making the point that as socialists, we should be thinking about this dynamic a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like the least of our worries what the rich do at their homes and in their consumption lives. But there's kind of 2 major points I want to make. And the first is kind of like what I just said, we should really be worried about not what the rich do with their money, but how they make their money, how they generate their money. And, obviously there's a lot of rich people that might be independently wealthy and just sort of like laying around consuming. But, most people get rich through, working in some sort of industry mm-hmm. and some sort of sector where they're, exploiting workers, but also nature to generate tremendous profit. So the example I give in the piece is if we have a CEO of a aviation company, like an airline, and that person spends 10 to 12 hours a day kind of organizing this industry and expanding it to try to make profit by selling air travel as a commodity. But then 2 hours a day, they go home and eat a steak or drive an SUV. Why do we only pay attention to those 2 hours when they're doing this consumptive activity? And the piece kind of responds to all this research on how the rich cause climate change that only looks at their consumption, totally ignores their role as owners, as investors, as profiteers, mm-hmm. who and it just doesn't look at that part of their role in the economy. Now, the second point I like to make is that even a rich person's consumption or a working class person's consumption, it doesn't really matter. Both of them have connections to emissions and impacts, but both of them are also connected to a for-profit producer who provisions that consumption. So even a rich person who is eating driving an SUV, but an oil company sold them the oil that they put into that SUV, and the oil company is actually profiting off of that relationship. And in my view, deserves way more responsibility. The person making the money off the exchange between a consumer mm-hmm. and a producer is the one really getting the best of that exchange. So you'll have Exxon, and then you have a person that's just filling up their tank, right? And yet again, all this research and whenever you hear the word carbon footprint, whenever you mm-hmm. hear that word, it literally acts as if 100% of the emissions should be blamed and should be the responsibility of the consumer who bought that oil or who ate that steak or who has to heat their house this way. And it just completely erases the role of for-profit production that is behind those consumption acts.
Yeah, and the reason I like this piece so much is a lot of times when people talk about climate change, particularly in the West as Americans, right? It's it's a spiritual problem of we have too much excess in our culture, and these things, like again, we're not even saying that like, excessive like driving around, using gas guzzlers, eating a lot of meat. Like, we're not saying do whatever you want and it's all good.
Yeah.
But the point is, instead of saying like, okay, we need to have like a spiritual awakening as Americans and like to be more vegetarian and to ride bicycles more, like all those things, yes. But the reason we drive our cars, the reason that we rely so much on red meat is because there's a huge for-profit industry behind those that pumps those into American society. Not that we just, our souls are so corrupted by our
absolutely.
consumerism, right?
Yeah.
And
go ahead, man.
It reminds me of, two things. I'd say in my pre-Marxist utopian socialist days, I had this observation that like MTV Cribs was going to lead to the revolution because it would just give us a view into like what we're being kept out of, right? And I think your piece is such a, that's what struck out to me reading your piece is like, that's not really all there is to it, right? Like, and those examples of like the much bigger, like just why the food pyramid looks the way it is. It isn't because of like consumers, it's because of industry, basically.
Yeah. And the thing is, we can relate to MTV Cribs because well, not everyone, but we live in houses, right. And we also consume things. And I think one other point I make is a lot of the people that produce this research that blames the rich for their consumption are themselves kind of professional class, very climate aware, very anxious. A lot of them are academics and scientists who, some of them have a pretty decent middle class existence. And so they are very anxious about their own consumption, right? Their own complicity in the climate crisis. So they kind of can very easily sort of be like, but look at these rich people consuming way more than me. And I'm trying hard to do my part. And I'm trying. And so we can relate to that. What we can't relate to is the boardroom in Exxon, is the actual decisions that drive this economy, which happen behind closed doors. We don't see them, we don't experience them, and yet that's where the power is, as we know. It's the power over investment, it's the power over production decisions, and it's not. And I don't even mean to make it sound like these capitalists are sort of all powerful, because they themselves are structured by the forces of competition and market volatility, and they are anxious themselves about trying. And to be honest, that being responsible as carbon citizens is like the last thing on their mind. They're just like trying to win the capitalist profit game. But that zone of our economy is off limits to politics. It's off limits to our visibility and experience. So because of that, we almost don't even consider it when we think about responsibility, when we think about the kind of forces we need to target to actually solve climate change. Right. But that's actually where the power is.
Well, that's kind of so fascinating with the colonial pipeline stuff, which you have the government saying, this is a private affair. Whether they want to pay ransom is up to them. And it's like, okay, on one hand, that's good. But on the other hand, we've privatized like major parts of our energy infrastructure. It's kind of all of our problems. But we just don't consider it. It's like, right? I don't know. It's amazing.
Well, yeah, I mean, even worse is the electricity system, which we saw in Texas. People die when they don't get electricity, and yet we just say it's cool that we're going to allow these private utilities to control it for profit, even though it's like what economists call a natural monopoly. Like, we can't have multiple utilities servicing this electricity. We have to give it to one, and that one gets to just sort of pay their shareholders and underinvest in the grid, and in the case of Texas, not winterize their infrastructure, and we just say, oh yeah, that's just how electricity should be.
It's what the market could provide.
Which I mean, this is like a really important problem, especially for like the environmental movement. And it's a good way to start to transition into your piece in Catalyst too. There's we're nowhere near where we need to be as a socialist movement in this country or anything like that. But there's a little bit more development of like a consciousness and like understanding about politics. And a lot of these okay, we're going to think about climate change as solely my relationship as an individual and like my consumer choices, And also, I'm not going to think about the electrical grid as something that like we can really touch because that's off limits for democracy. Like these are frameworks that are really important that if we are going to deal with this crisis, we have to get over, because these old habits that have been sort of brought into like the American left, the American environmental movement from like years and years and years of like not having a strong socialist materialist analysis are really going to hamper us if we want to implement the changes that are necessary.
Absolutely, yeah.
So on that, let's sort of transition to the piece in Catalyst, which is called, people should definitely check it out, Still No Shortcuts for Climate Change. And I want to start by first saying it's sometimes hard to talk about these moments like the Green New Deal, because I remember when Bernie Sanders, when they first announced like the Bernie plan, and being really excited because, okay, not only are we going to do something, that's obviously better than Trump or whatever we got through Obama, but there was a real structural dynamic to it. And now it's sometimes hard to sit here in 2021 on the precipice of defeat and trying to see, what Biden and the We Believe in Science crowd are going to do, and figure out how can we implement the changes that are necessary. So that was a decent amount of stuff. So maybe just to start, how would you sort of categorize the early Biden administration response to climate change, climate catastrophe? I don't know what term we're using these days.
Yeah. Apparently, like, climate change was like a right-wing way to kind of shift the discourse from global warming to make it sound like less terrifying. But anyway, we all say it. Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of hype about Biden's climate plan. He has, sort of suggested, obviously, this infrastructure jobs plan that's trillions of dollars of spending, which, if you go back to Obama, far above what Obama presented. Obama's stimulus was like 800 billion, and it was even Paul Krugman was like, "This is ridiculous. This is way too low." There's two things I would say that. Almost all the kind of serious climate people on the left and even scientists are saying that 2 trillion over 8 years, I think, is what he's proposing. Is just not, it's not enough at all. It's not even close to enough. Adam Tooze, the sort of economic historian, has a really good piece, I think, in the New Statesman, where he just lays it out. He said, if you're serious about decarbonization, it's just not enough. And so there's been a kind of discourse on the left, like, how much should it be? It should be 10 trillion or 3 trillion. And that's fine. But to me, it's also the real kind of more qualitative problem with it is that it's just, it's not really taking control of the issue. Through the public sector and through government investment. It's basically a bunch of tax credits and kind of incentives to try to attract private capital to make this energy transition happen. So they want, like a bunch of, for instance, like Danish wind companies to come in and set up offshore wind off the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. They want a bunch of, private solar, anti-union private solar developers to build big solar farms all over. And to me, like, just leaving it to the private sector, just leaving it to capital and hoping that, capital will find a way to make this energy transition profitable is just such a losing bet. It's just not going to work out.
Well, it's one of those things that I'm curious what you think about this, because it's like we need mass state movement on this, because they actually are the only ones who have the capacity to do it. Like, even and I think this is one of the problems that kind of like American liberalism in the most general sense like falls into like the We Believe Science crowd. Like, they failed to recognize the structural constraints. I can't remember the guy's name. Boy, he's way older than me. But one of these new Texas like oil executives, they've he's had like fawning coverage in the Financial Times because he's one of these guys like, oh, I understand that, climate change is real. And I know that we need to do more and more and more. But like all of these guys are saying this stuff now. And this is the oil industry. And like, I don't think these people are doing that stuff with good faith, but I'm just saying, like, let's say we convince every oil executive tomorrow that climate change is a problem. Yeah. Structurally, what do you expect them to do? Yeah. Like you need to have, the state to get involved. That's why the just transition was such an important part of the Green New Deal.
Yeah. No, I mean, the New Deal was, like the original one, the OG, it was all about public investment. And we were in a depression, and it was just like, we're just going to take control of this situation and just, put people to work and build bridges and by the way, build a bunch of energy projects, hydroelectric dams. They electrified pretty much the whole countryside during the New Deal. Like 10% of farmers in 1932 had electricity. By 1950, it was 90%. This is the scale of what we need to do now. And it was all led by public investment. And then you start to get into World War II, which is the other sort of familiar analogy where the government just started demanding, we need this many planes produced, we need this many tanks. And they were telling, sometimes they were contracting with private capital, but they were saying, you must do this, you must produce this. And that's not what Biden's doing. He's saying, how about a tax credit? Will that make you solve climate change? Well, well, how about this little carrot here? Like, if you really believe this is a planetary emergency, that where literally like human survival is at stake, you need to take control of it. We need a massive kind of public sector mobilization, like it is an emergency, and that's not what Biden's doing.
No, what they are acting as if is under stake is like corporate competition, like our businesses, basically, right? That's why you hear even Warren talk about IP protections, and why those are going to be vital for fighting climate change.
Yeah.
She also wanted to green the military. That was her.
Right.
No, and it's like, yeah. And like, I mean, the military has a huge budget, but that's not really the full answer to climate change there. Yeah. Matt, do you have that clip, that Obama clip?
Oh yeah. Give me 1 second.
Because I think this is a really good clip because I like talking about the specific climate aspects here, but I think what you run up against almost immediately when you're talking about the Green New Deal or any kind of real action on this is that you have to have a stronger like structural understanding of how like American democracy and American capitalism works. And you make a really great point in the Catalyst piece. I don't have it in front of me, but something along the lines about Obama and oil production, and how it was the fear of capital strike more than the necessarily just like, oh, he's bought out, he's got too many people giving him campaign donations. And we have this clip here, and I think it illustrates it well, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it. This is post-presidency Obama, right?
It's 2018, if I know what clip it is.
Just like, as the world is ending.
I was extraordinarily proud of the Paris Accords because, look, I know, I know we're an oil country, and we need American energy, and by the way, American energy production. You wouldn't always know it, but it went up every year I was president.
The giant cherries.
That whole suddenly America's like the biggest oil producer and the biggest that was me, people. I just want you to. So. It's a little like sometimes you go to Wall Street and folks would be grumbling about anti-business. I said, have you checked where your stocks were when I came in office and where they are now? What are you talking? What are you complaining about? Just say thank you, please. Because I want to raise your taxes a couple %.
I'm a guy cheering that, going crazy in the audience.
Honestly, what kind of person is doing that?
People that love Obama.
But this is, I mean, I think this example is really important because look, this is the belief science guy. This is the guy, you know,
Exactly.
and, you know, this is somebody, you know, there's dynamics in Obama's presidency that obviously changed with the makeup of Congress, but this is somebody who had a lot of leeway to do a lot of different things, especially early in his presidency. And what we got from him was oil production going up every year and then him bragging about it after the fact.
Yeah, which is like the most egregious thing in the face of the climate crisis to brag about that. And so, on some measures, literally he presided over the largest oil and gas boom in U.S. history. Like it was so dramatic how much oil and gas production went up. And I really want to kind of give credit to a book called Levers of Power by Kevin Young and his co-authors that really actually they're the one that make this case that and they make it they do a real intense study of the Obama presidency and show on issue after issue, Wall Street, healthcare, climate and environment. He's you know, he was just completely subservient to industry. Now, when studying the climate stuff and the environment stuff, it's a little puzzling because it's pretty much known that the oil and gas industry and the energy extractive industry doesn't really contribute much to the Democratic Party. It's very much firmly entrenched in the GOP. And so there's not really this story where, yeah, like you said, like it's not clear that Obama was bought out by campaign contributions or anything like this. So in Levers of Power, they argue that it was really more they call it the structural power of business to engage in a capital strike that really, particularly in the face of the financial crisis of 2008, that would just further destabilize the economy.
Do you mind just sort of like briefly for folks who aren't familiar with that term, what capital strike means?
Yeah. So we know what a labor strike is. Most of us, when labor withdraws it and workers don't show up and they create a crisis. But capital can strike too because they control investment and because they are, you know, basically they are the lifeblood of jobs and economic activity and GDP growth and all this stuff. And if they withdraw investment, they can actually exacerbate or they can create a crisis, but they can exacerbate a crisis. And so in 2009, Obama's number one priority is just trying to kind of bring us back from the abyss of this cataclysmic crisis. And so he was talking a lot about, actually, he was talking about something called a Green New Deal in 2009. He was talking about, you know, in his campaign acceptance speech, he said, like, this is the moment where the oceans begin to recede and the planet begins to heal. He was talking about big regulations on Wall Street, but what the book argues is that the threat of a capital strike and the threat of kind of withdrawing investment and throwing the economy back into crisis basically forced him to just do whatever industry wanted. And so, and it's just astonishing when you start to look at it, like in March of 2010, he announced a major initiative to open up much of the Atlantic seaboard to offshore drilling. And he was just going to do this. And he actually gave a speech where he said that, you know, the great thing about offshore drilling now is they don't, the technology is so sophisticated, they don't spill anymore. And it's really great. And then literally 3 weeks later, the Deepwater Horizon blowout happened. We had the worst maritime oil spill in US history. And and then even in that, like he basically handed over the cleanup to BP and British, and was like, you guys figure this out. And they didn't have any capacity to figure it out. And he's just like, well, so anyway, and so throughout the Obama years, you see this just total subservience to the fossil capital. And it's a little puzzling unless you kind of look at this more kind of structural power that the energy industry has over society as a whole.
Yeah, it's always, I remember with the Dakota Access Pipeline thing, all the sort of engineering statements you get about how safe these things are. And it's just like an entire culture to itself. And immediately after the thing's in, it's starting to leak. And that's just like, if you can fucking love science, but you also better like fucking trust industry, basically.
Yeah, trust industry.
But BP was like throwing trash and golf balls down there to try to plug the.
It's so insane, yeah, to realize the people who have like direct power in those situations, how they're trying to deal with the problems. Well, let me bring this into the conversation then, because obviously we recognize there's a problem, right? And laying out the question there, or the constraints, like, whatever. We don't even need to spend too much time trying to like divine Obama's like personal motivations. You can see that there are structural constraints that are just baked into the nature of capitalism. And I'm sorry to keep harping on this to some of our listeners, but I just keep on trying to make these points, because a lot of times people want to think about politics as just like a moral plane, right? Where like, it's good versus evil, and there's a lot of evil people and there's a lot of good people out there. But I think if we want to start winning, we need to start thinking about structure and power. To begin that, is like we're talking about the oil industry right now. To do anything, we're going to have to shift our politics and our power. And that's just is going to mean that we're going to have to be able to leverage the power of the working class to do something different. I'd be happy to go in any direction you'd like, but as a quick example, here in Texas, people who work in oil have seen what the future will bring. And that what I mean by that is that there was a huge lack of profitability, and you saw people lose their jobs. And you're seeing people today, there's, another big push, I believe, with Exxon, locking out oil and gas workers, right? These workers here are seeing what the companies are going to do to them. And they're also recognizing that it does seem that this is not going to be an industry that's going to be as strong for the next 50, 60 years for them. That's a huge labor opportunity to try to organize something different. I know, people like Ryan Pollock and people in the AFL-CIO are trying to like jump into that. But anyways, this is a structural opportunity. And, I don't know, like, it's hard to say if we're meeting the moment or not, because we are really weak and we're trying to build power. But these are the kinds of things that we need to understand, that if we want to do something different, we need to leverage the opportunities that we have to fight for working people and to save the planet.
Yeah. And I think the oil industry really, it sucks to work in, because it's beset by these booms and busts. The last bust was in really the 1980s. It was devastating. I don't know if you ever read the book Friday Night Lights, but it actually takes place in the wake of this just utter calamity of oil price crash and layoffs all across Texas, and then it went through a boom in the 2000s, and of course a lot of people make a lot of money in those booms, but then it comes crashing down again. And I think another thing that if we say just transition, if we say we want to, we can make that argument that we actually want to provide stable livelihoods in the energy economy that aren't prone to this kind of insane volatility. That forces, good times and then total shuttering and total layoffs. That's, again, I think, what the Green New Deal was trying to do by proposing things like a job guarantee, proposing things like public works projects that would give people union jobs, steady pay, and this kind of thing, providing economic security, where it's very clear the particularly the oil and gas sector has been incredibly volatile and unreliable in that regard. So,
yeah, and I just we are all big fans of Leo Panitch. His work is incredibly important, and you note in the piece the distinction between class focused and class rooted politics, and the oil and gas industry there really hits on it. But how would you sort of describe the dynamic today, 2021, post Bernie, when it comes to the environmental movement, trying to move from being, sort of class focused versus class rooted movement? Because a couple examples of how, like, kind of professional class sensibilities are sort of big hurdles to building the kind of movements that we need.
Yeah. So the big breakthrough, I think, of the Green New Deal, when it really kind of exploded onto the scene in 2018, you had AOC and the Sunrise Movement, was that finally, after so many decades of this kind of thing where it's like environmental politics means you're going to cost jobs, you're going to make people's lives worse, you're going to have this spiritual awakening, which means you're going to do like have less, and you're going to be submit yourself to austerity and all that kind of stuff. Finally, the Green New Deal comes out and it's like, no, we can actually address inequality. We can actually improve the working class's material lives through climate action by job guarantees, but also by like, how about giving people cheaper or even free electricity instead of saying like, well, climate change is costly and you need to pay a carbon tax now to pay for the cost of pollution. No, we could actually provide decommodified public goods like public transit, public electricity, public, so that was the breakthrough. But it was kind of like the Green New Deal politics kind of discovered like we could build a politics for the working class. We could build a politics that appeals to the material needs of the masses of people, but yet still in this period from 2018 to 2020, and I'm totally guilty of this, like the people driving the discussion and the policy construction and the even in the Bernie campaign, like the people who were writing the policies, like, and it's just all coming from academia, like myself. It's all coming from like journalists, scientists, NGO, sort of environmental NGOs. So it's sort of rooted in the professional class. So yeah, I refer to it as like a politics of the professional class for the working class. But that is not what Leo Panitch and others have called a class-rooted politics that is really organically embedded in the working class, that is sort of grounded in working class communities, is in the ways in which we've talked about unions in the past as being literally like in workers' everyday lives, like the union hall and the union, it was just part of the everyday lives of workers, where it was literature, it was speeches, it was games, and the ways, similar institutions, people, like churches and things that are like really grounded in people's lives that that would really motivate and mobilize those the working class people. And that's what we're still really lacking. We're still lacking those institutions that are really firmly embedded in people's lives. And DSA and others were it's trying to kind of, because DSA of course has this kind of professional class, downwardly mobile millennial kind of a kind of demographic skew, or if you will. But I think the goal is to really just keep trying to project a politics outward to working class communities, to try to build kind of institutions that will actually matter in their lives, and actually that can kind of build the working class politics we need, I think.
I agree, and it's like, and these things are important. One, because we're saying, okay, the task needs this kind of mobilization, but two, it's not even unique to the environmental movement. But you note in your piece that when a lot of the movements around the environment are sort of dominated by a certain professional class of folks, right, with certain sensibilities, then the concessions that they get from a Biden administration, for example, aren't always very material, right? Like, you know in your piece that there's a lot of language stuff in Biden's earlier plans about, frontline communities,
yes,
which of course help out, people like that. But you could see very quickly that this is not a very material, commitment as much as it is, okay, this is the thing that they care about, and I'm like referencing it. I'm acknowledging its existence.
Yeah, one of the proudest things I am of that piece is I call it moralistic catnip for the professional class.
Yeah, I think that was very good. Well, because you make the point here is like, what is it? 57% of Americans don't think that climate change will affect them, correct?
Yeah. So Yeah, and frontline communities is kind of, it is very centered in kind of NGO academic. It's all we talk about. And it's you've heard this language where it's about centering those communities and bringing justice to those communities. And it's important. Like they're often talking about the most marginalized communities, the most affected by climate change, but also like fossil fuel toxic infrastructure. But what those communities are facing, take, indigenous people fighting in Standing Rock, like what those communities are actually facing is the power of energy industry again, right? It's their power, the people running the Dakota Access Pipeline, or the people that run chemical factories like ExxonMobil and on the Gulf Coast of the United States. So again, like we actually need to build a type of coalition to take on that power. And it's too much to expect those very marginalized frontline communities to actually themselves be able to build the power. And the other thing is like with the Biden plan is it actually, the thing the activists, which are based in the NGO spaces, they really wanted this thing that 40% of the investment that Biden projects is going to go to these frontline communities. And that was one of the big concessions. But when you actually start to be like, what does that mean? It means that you're going to have to do means testing. You're going to have to say, who's a frontline community? Who speaks for the frontline communities? And then you're going to have to target those investments, that money, to very specifically curated frontline communities. And, that we've seen means testing has been disastrous for, it divides the working class. It divides it creates kind of political resentment. And also it's just like, how do you do it? And in Biden's actual plan, he proposed, well, we're going to create what he called an environmental justice screening tool. That he's going to, it's going to be some sort of algorithm that determines if you're disadvantaged enough to be one of these 40% frontline communities. So like that is not, I think I'm more on the side where we really need to, Medicare for all and other universal public goods are really going to mobilize the masses of people and get a lot of people really excited about that type of politics. So.
Well, and it's wacky, and then especially it's wacky too when you have these more professional class folks figuring out what these communities want. One of these sort of leads me to my last question for you is like is a kind of fixation on decentralization and really small scale localized responses to climate change. Do you think that's the answer? Is small really beautiful, or do we need big mass programs to deal with the challenge?
Well, maybe this is for another day, but like you can actually trace the kind of neoliberal turn. I don't know if we talked, basically the rightward turn of politics towards capital in the 1970s to kind of on the right and the left, everyone starts being like, well, decentralization is where it's at. And if you're on the right, you say the market is so beautiful because it's decentralized. It's like people buying and selling and the prices are, but on the left too, it's since the 70s, this sort of environmentalism is like, if it's local, it's good. If it's decentralized and community scale, then it's good. And like the climate crisis is again a global, hugely significant, like large scale crisis. It's not a small scale crisis that you can solve. I probably unfairly sort of maligned a solar Brooklyn co-op. There's like apparently this solar co-op in Brooklyn that like, of course, we're not going to solve the climate crisis like one solar co-op in Brooklyn at a time.
I don't want to bring up random Twitter spats, but I do remember when the electricity first started going off in Texas, tweeting something, it doesn't matter, and it sort of gets big or whatever, and then one of these big decentralization like advocates, super green granola guys, like this wouldn't be a problem if Texas's grid actually was more decentralized. And it's like, this is the most insane time to say that like what Texas needs right now is more decentralization. But essentially what they were arguing for was like every block to be engaged in power production, which I'm not an engineer, I will admit, but that does not seem like the most efficient way to generate power for society at large. It seems incredibly wasteful. Like drop even the whatever you need to power it, be it solar, wind, or whatever. Just like transporting the tools and the equipment to every community to do that, I feel it would have a huge environmental cost, let alone probably be inefficient, once it's built.
Yeah, instead of weeding the garden, you have the neighborhood kids Windex the solar panels.
Well, this is actually Elon Musk's another guy in the news. This is his solution too. He announced his power wall, which is a big battery that every household should get, so that when they can basically recharge their battery with solar panels, and then they can be off the grid. And
until your house blows up.
Yeah, until it catches on fire, which those batteries have been known to do. But think of the material extraction it requires to give hundreds of millions of people their own privatized battery. It's just insane, and it's not the way to deal with this crisis.
Yeah, and my pin on this is just don't be a dupe on these things, because what these arguments all sort of end at is that we have no democratic right to try to control these systems, on the large scale. So the only answer is to retreat into the woods. Like Marx got pissed about this too. With anti-capitalists were like, okay, we can't beat the system, so we're going to go off in the woods, and the 6 of us are going to have a nice life. Look, I love rural life and all those kind of things, but that's not a solution to these problems, right? Right. I'm very happy for you if you're off the grid and have a nice. I'm honestly I envy it, but it's not the solution to the large scale problem.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's what he called utopian socialism, or Engels in particular. This incredible attack, and Marx actually thought the centralization of industry actually was creating the material conditions for this kind of emancipation of humanity as a whole. And you could emancipate 6 people in a little commune, but if you want to emancipate all of us, you're going to probably need to take advantage of some of these incredibly productive industrial centralized systems that we all are kind of embedded in right now. So
no, exactly. Well, Matt, I really appreciate you spending some time with us this evening. I'd love to do it again sometime soon.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, take care.
Yeah. Decentralization, man. I mean, that comes up a lot when you get into it with Bitcoin people online.
Which, by the way, they're having a rough go of it.
Yeah, with Elon Musk saying he's going to pause accept payments for
he's
cars.
Not going to accept it because of the environmental toll.
I saw one angle that he's actually just manipulating the price of Bitcoin.
100%. I mean,
right.
100% because he's doing a Dogecoin thing now, and he announced today that he's working with Dogecoin to beef up their capabilities. So.
Well, whatever the fuck. What? Okay. I'm glad the Dogecoin capabilities.
I mean, this is one of those things that, I mean, the Bitcoin thing, we should do a whole sit down thing on it, because I feel I get tired of having to repeat myself on this one.
We should do a scripted almost segment maybe where we just
that's what I mean, because it's just I'm tired of having the Bitcoin conversation with people all the time, because but Bitcoin is it's the same kind of for people who think that Bitcoin is going to be something that's going to liberate us, right? It's the same kind of idea when it comes to decentralization of the electrical grid or our capacity for these things. I understand why people have a first reaction, okay, this is good. We can exert more control over these things and get the bad actors out, right? That's the kind of generalized understanding for all of these things. It's honestly, it's not even particular to different subjects, be it Bitcoin or electricity. It's a kind of generalized, smaller, localized has to be better than big. But as I was, just saying, it's you have to understand that all of these questions are fundamentally questions about power. And when you think that retreating into smaller forms is preferable, because you think you're going to be to exert more power over these systems, you are actually just conceding to the powerful the systems that they themselves monopolize or took control over, right? And with that, and this is why there's a mistake there. With that, you weaken your ability, to do transformational change, because if you're only able to control very, very small things, then you won't be able to do the big things that we're talking about. We're talking about nothing short of changing the world, and you don't do that with the super small
Yeah. I mean,
separated things like that.
to put in like the utopian socialist sense of like the early 19th century, it's like you can move to upstate to a commune, but that's not going to solve like the slave trade, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
you haven't, yeah.
Well, we got a couple things we can do before. What do you think in time wise? I know we have.
Let's definitely do this Michael stuff. Maybe we can,
Yeah.
because so a big, I mean, David and I were talking before, like, the how are you doing this week? Well, both of us feel a sort of sense of dread.
Yeah.
I mean, mainly, obviously for the obvious reason of being subjected to the horrifying images of, the invasion and bombing and shelling and enclosure of the West Bank and Gaza, and disgusting. It's also been strange because, like probably the most since he died, Michael Brooks has been appearing in
Very
my feed,
present.
and for his clarity on these issues. And the one we played up top for the cold open, that was certainly like, that was towards the end of his life, and that was definitely when he had gotten into I guess I would put it like into his final form, in I guess a Dragon Ball Z sense. He was at the height of his powers at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to play a different clip. This is him on I-24. Well, first, before we do that, among the people that shared this Michael Brooks lecture was Halsey. Now, I must confess, I'm not super familiar with Halsey. I mean, I think this is one of the cases where if I heard the songs, I'd know, but I don't follow pop music as close as I did. But Halsey, the musician, shared with just a simple title, "It's Not Complicated" by Michael Brooks. It's got almost 3,000 retweets, 19,000 likes. Halsey has 14.1 million followers. And, a lot of times in this past year, people have said that they wish Michael was here. And I definitely, like, every day miss Michael.
For sure.
And although when it's done in reference to was here to weigh in on this petty intra-left dispute, I sometimes think like there's a saving grace that he doesn't have to put up with some of this shit. But definitely this period like this, I'm definitely feeling his absence. And I think it's amazing that so many other people are as well. It's kind of mind blowing.
It's been really great to see, as it is, difficult. I mean, there's other people watching us, not just you and I right now, but as well as I do how hard it can be to miss somebody so much who was so close to you, and then see them in the public sphere like that, and be really proud and happy and wish that they were able to see how beloved that they were and how much impact that their voice had on folks.
And this is such a difficult time for so many people. Like when these issues come up, and like I just see the way people share the show, like this show is more urgent, right? Like when there's something like this going on, and having him in studio and being able to bounce stuff off him was amazing and such a treasure.
And again, this is one of those things that is just the pain of losing somebody so close to you is going to be extreme. But the times when it feels really real are moments like these, because I remember so many conversations that we had before, like big moments like this, whenever it felt like there was something big in the news, and just trying to figure out, okay, not only are we going to talk about this, but how do we need to present this? How do we need to get these ideas out there? And those were always, really incredible moments to be a part of, but they also gave me a lot of personal clarity, and I miss that a lot. And I sometimes fall into a habit of having imaginary conversations about these things, because it's I don't know, it's It's a lot. Well, we should do this because actually this is the other fun side, too, because this clip is so great, man. I don't know if you wanted to set it up, but this was one of those things where Michael was really proud of this clip in particular.
Yeah, all I want to say about the run up is this: is I'd been working, like I worked with Michael since 2015, and at that point, you know, I was never in awe of Michael because we were both like basically Sam Cedars producers, like gophers, basically, right? And that was kind of our dynamic. Like I loved working with him, but it wasn't like the amazing Michael, like how people talk about him now. This period of time when he started doing these hits and like building up his confidence, and like he always was a great conversation about these things, but he never had the ability to, I think, put it into paragraphs while he's speaking until like about this period of time when he was really hitting his stride. And all this, and I think Michael would want us to say this doesn't come from like his magic brain. It comes from his dedication to these issues and just the constant time and effort to like read and his curiosity like was endless. So I just want to play this here because I remember him coming in and he loved to show me and David and also all the TMBS viewers anytime he
Probably
had
did this on the show like 5 times.
I know we literally may have done this one like 5 times, but it was great, and so I wanted to bring it back up because it does like he really is hitting his stride at this point.
Let's be real here. There was one group.
Oh, let me not that fast, so that's too much of a stride.
Yeah, that's Lex superpowers, being able to understand that.
Let's be real here. I mean, there was one group that wasn't included in that resolution, and that was the Palestinians as a people, where regular racism and dehumanization towards them is entirely accepted. The reality is that Ilhan Omar is correct on the merits. She's correct on the policy. Saying that she said this comment about dual allegiance is a great leap to begin with. And I have to say, I find it extraordinary that people on the right, who sometimes accurately, by the way, not always, but sometimes accurately, say people on the left, you know, jump to accusations too quickly of various bigotries and read into things. They've been reading into every single thing that the Congresswoman has said from the beginning, most of which are substantive critiques of a sovereign nation state that happens to administer a horrific regime that violates people's rights on a daily basis in Gaza, the West Bank, and even inside Israel in some respects. The new indictment about Netanyahu isn't just garden variety corruption. It involves actually undermining democracy. So I support Ilhan Omar. I don't buy, and I also, in fact, support Corbyn, in fact. And the reality is that these things are going to become debated on the merits. And we're not going to have a false equivalency and actually drag down the profoundly serious issue of anti-Semitism by equating it with all criticism of a sovereign nation state that administers apartheid in reality.
Look, I think this is...
I forgot to say, as a Jew.
So,
right.
That's true.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that this was from one of the times we reviewed this, so that's Joshua Kahn Russell. But I mean, should we hear Michael, or I think people can maybe go to the clip if they want to... see the rest of Michael's review on that, but I mean, I mean, really, like, impressive that he developed into that. Because I remember he was doing, like, if people want to search the old Majority Report for the global quickie, he had a few different iterations of this sort of like global perspective and ability to talk about these issues, and it clicked at a certain point. It probably around when we were doing those live shows, and I'm just happy for him that it's still, you know, a source of clarity for people about these things.
I think that's the way to frame it, is that these conversations, I mean, it's beautiful for his voice and his clarity. It's sad for, you know, the continuation of these systems, and how clear the playbook is, that it still is, you know, there's like the same crap, the same kind of talking points get trotted out every time people are reminded of you know, of the apartheid state in Israel. And yeah, I mean, it's been really sweet though to see all of the, you know, the remembrance and the how well this work has sort of been able to stand up on its own 2 feet. Because you don't even need to introduce the clip.
No, I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's just synthesizes so much. Like he brings the way he brings up Casrills and South Africa, like right, like in order. I mean, he just had done the work, I guess.
He'd done the work, and I gotta say, maybe later we'll find a little bit more from that clip, because one thing I have to say that I always appreciated about Michael, and in his passing, I think sometimes some folks, because how we want to remember people in a certain light. Michael was a really good hater. And Michael in this interview really demolishes this guy. And I don't know, the conversations we had.
It's great
were
with
very
Michael,
funny.
because Michael's doing an impression of the guy too. Like, so he's doing both parts. Like, so I said this and this guy.
I mean, it was really, really masterful. He treated people with the respect that they deserved. And, somebody who's going to go up there and say just vile things and lie about what's going on there and try to slander Ilhan Omar, who was doing the just and correct thing in that moment. Maybe not perfectly polished, if I remember correctly, for all of the kind of bad faith attacks that she was going to receive. But she was on the good, she was doing the right thing. And this other guy was trying to, run interference for empire and genocide.
And I love the way Michael went out of his way to stand up for Corbyn. Frankly, there should have been a lot more of that from people in the media in general, because I think there was. I mean, maybe I don't have the sense of the UK press done entirely, but like it just seemed like he just had to take it and take it and take it.
I mean, I think that was the worst. I mean, the lies that have been spread about Jeremy Corbyn are just despicable. And it was important to call out then. It's even more important to call out now, because they were effectively able to use that to undermine the aspirations of the Labour Party.
Well, and you see why. Like, I mean, I think Ilhan and Rashida Tlaib among the squad obviously have the best response, but Corbyn's was, like the first or second word was the provocations, right? Like emphasizing what needs to be emphasized about an issue with the power dynamics as clear as Michael says they are.
Honestly, and for all of like the blathering that we get from folks about really all I really want is peace. It is people like Corbyn and Michael Brooks who are the people who are really fighting for peace, not people who are being mouthpieces and apologists for war crimes.
Yeah. So should we save the bridge stuff for patrons, David, or what do you think? Should we do it now?
Yeah, we could save it.
Yeah, I think
take a second.
I think that's what we need. Yeah, I could compose myself a little bit. It does sense of feeling a little bit haunted, I think, by all this stuff, just history and it's but patrons will have not only will you be getting a locked and loaded post game this evening, but upcoming on Monday we'll be releasing a talk with Derek Davison about Biden foreign policy sort of in general. He's proprietor of the great Foreign Exchanges Substack that is an extremely great educational resource that Michael was a big fan of Derek Davison despite never quite remembering how to pronounce his last name without the second D. But yeah, that'll be for patrons coming up too. Anything else you want to say before we sign off, David?
Yeah, just for people who are still on the fence, definitely check out the conversation that we released from behind the paywall with Paula O'Connell on James Connolly.
Yeah.
It's a really, really, I was really proud of that conversation. And James Connolly is someone whose work you should definitely be, introducing yourself to if you're not familiar already. But we're putting those out, each week, along with think tanks and other bonus interviews. We also talked with Milton Alamati about the great and radical and critical thinker Walter Rodney. But we're really trying to make as much of our content public and front facing as possible. But we need your support to do that. So definitely consider joining up at patreon.com/leftreckoning.
Also, if for some reason you're watching this and not subscribed to the YouTube channel, we want to get to 10K, folks.
Oh yeah, that'd be really helpful. We're close.
Yeah, that's a free thing you can do because that's a milestone I'm anxious to put on the backside of myself. So
exactly.
All right, patrons, we will see you in about 25 minutes with the post game. David, thank you so much. Also, thanks, Matt Huber. Go check out his pieces in Jacobin and Catalyst. We'll put them in the show notes. Until next time, peace and free Palestine.
Hell yeah.